All right, tactical athlete discussion. Let's go. I've been getting a lot more of these questions lately, and they're not that difficult to organize and execute. There's a little bit of tailoring that you may need to do if, say, your police department, your fire department, military unit, etc., has their own testing standards that you need to be, maybe annually tested on or every 6 months. You're always going to have to perform at those. So that'll come in later when I talk about conditioning modalities and things like that. But in general, with most military units, with most law enforcement units, etc., the fitness standards are not the best most of the time. Often they are picked because they're easy to proctor. I recognize that in the military, especially, different units have different testing protocols, and some of them are certainly better than others. But as your base level, get into the military, that normal test everyone's got to take, most of those are pretty much crap. They're good at testing aerobic fitness, but they don't do a good job of assessing job demand performance for individuals who are being tested. So where do we start? The number one thing that I think is needed the most because of its ability to protect us from injury, increase our resiliency, and be more of an asset to our teammates is getting stronger. There's many ways to do that. I think the easiest way is to just hit either your Texas method style powerlifting template if you have the time for that, or if not, just a basic 5x5 program that you do 2 days a week. And I think you can get by on 1 day a week, but 2 is preferential to 1. You're going to see better results, faster results for it for sure. But generally speaking, these are programs that you're just going to be doing something basic: squat, deadlift, bench press, overhead press, barbell row, weighted pull-ups, things like that. And the goal here is not to replicate your conditioning-based testing that you may have to perform for, or to somehow morph this into conditioning. The job here is to get strong, and I find a lot of people actually struggle with that part the most. The idea of like, oh, I just did a set of 5. I'm supposed to sit here for 2, 3, 4 minutes before I do another set. That's crazy. But it's really not. And the low repetition biases, strength development, which is really what you want. Depending on your job, added muscle mass isn't necessarily always going to be beneficial to you, depending on what your job is. But strength is always going to be beneficial to you. And everyone's a little different. Some people just have an aptitude for getting strong as hell, and some people just have to work harder at it. I'm one of those have to work harder at it guys, because I was definitely a run bunny when I was in the military, and it's taken a lot of time and effort to put on weight and do all these other things that I recognize to be important later in life. So that's really it. There's other implements that you can utilize too. Like, you don't have to do a barbell program. You can do a dumbbell-based program or a kettlebell-based program. All of these have their own pros and cons, but if you're just kind of starting on the strength journey, then picking something is, in this case, I think, better than doing nothing and just doing like body weight work all the time. If you're not following a specific program like Mad Cow 5x5 or Strong Lifts or something like that, then the way I break it down to people is, let's just think of it upper body and lower body. What do we need to check boxes for? So for the upper body, the boxes that we need to check are horizontal pushing and pulling, as well as vertical pushing and pulling. The reason I delineate between those two planes in the upper body is because a lot of the muscles utilized in the vertical segment differ quite a bit from the horizontal segment. And then for the lower body, it's very simple. We need to do something that's a squat, and we need to do something that's a hinge. And what does that mean? So one exercise that's going to be quad dominant, and one exercise that's going to be hamstring and glute dominant, so that our backside is getting that work it needs as well. So what can that look like? In a barbell program, That can look like I squat, barbell squat, I deadlift. For my upper body, I bench press and I do a bent row. And then for my vertical plane in the upper body, I'll do like a military press, overhead press, and maybe like weighted pull-ups, something along those lines. Or it could be farmer's carry. That's one that's a little bit deceptive. But it doesn't have to be any more complicated than just picking those handful of movements. And then what you seek to do is, you start at something you can do for 3 or 5 sets of 5. And then next week you add 5-10 pounds, depending on the lift, until you start failing at adding more weight. And you can no longer complete that progression of weight that you have chosen for the week. So it's very typical. People first get started on a barbell program. Every week their squat goes up 10 or 20 pounds. And then that happens for 8 to 12 weeks. And then you can no longer just add 10 pounds and complete 5 sets of 5 anymore. So the approach there that those programs usually recommend is you drop some weight back and then you go through the process again. And you can really get some really solid progress in like 6 months of that. After that point, you start to leave that beginner realm of, and even if you're an experienced first responder, military athlete, etc., even if you're very experienced at that, you always have to consider, like, if you haven't been doing strength training, then in that realm you're still a beginner. So your body requires time to adapt to these things, and over time that strengthens the bones, our joints, our connective tissues. Muscles become stronger. You're probably going to pack on a little size at least. So just consider that when I say beginner, it doesn't mean like you're a novice at what you do. It just means that with respect to this thing that you're doing, trying to get stronger with intention, that you're in a beginner status for at least the first 6 months. After that, from 6 months to getting into more of like 2 years from there, you're probably more in an intermediate status. And then at getting beyond that time frame, you're going to be more in that advanced status. And the reason it's important to delineate like what is a novice or beginner and intermediate and advanced is that your programming is just ultimately going to start looking differently. You can't afford to just slap on another 20 pounds to your deadlift if last week you deadlifted 225 pounds, because you're only lifting 225 for a set of 5. When you're advanced and maybe your deadlift is more like 600 plus pounds, that 600, every single rep of 600 pounds is going to take a proportionately higher strain on your body and its recovery ability than would 225. I mean, it almost is one of those things that, while it's a logical fallacy to say this, it kind of stands to reason, right? So yeah, we don't have to worry about that advanced stuff today. So then with like, say, a kettlebell program, those are more difficult to advance through weight as easily as a barbell. So like the big benefit to barbell training is it's so easy to load everything. You just add plates and you do the same lifts. With dumbbells and kettlebells, you start to become more limited in your lower body exercises based on like what your upper body can actually hold. So your upper body starts to become a little bit more of a limiter there. And so with that being the case, like that's sometimes where I think if kettlebells are like, or dumbbells are what you have the best access to, where it's just what you want to do because you find it more fun and you're going to stick with it. That's where like, okay, so my squat pattern might be a lunge. My hinge pattern might be like a kettlebell or a dumbbell swing, something like that. And then upper body and lower body, or upper body horizontal and vertical is pretty much just going to be the same. I can do bench, I can do row, I can do weighted pull-ups, I can do overhead press. That stuff doesn't change quite as much. But yeah, like with kettlebells, they tend to be in like several pound jumps, which like in some of your lifts, like going overhead, that might present more of a challenge, because adding 5 pounds per arm going overhead for a set of 5 or something like that, if you've not experienced that can be quite a jump. So you really have to have a strong foundation, and your progression might look a little bit different than just like slapping a certain amount of weight on each week. So yeah, those are the main things with strength. So I mean, strength improves our power output, our resiliency. It will benefit us in other things that we don't always think of as being more strength oriented, like ruck marching, or basically putting on a heavy pack with gear, or like with firefighters, their competency testing for ladder climbing. Those hoses are not light whatsoever, and considering that most of these people, whatever type of tactical athlete you are, there's probably going to be some expectation that you can move somebody else's body weight as well. And that's where this becomes a crucial component of building your body up and choosing your variations that will help mirror what you're going to be doing on the job. So like one of the squat variations I really like as an example, not that you have to do this, is a Zercher squat. I really like the Zercher squat because it's almost like this, kind of sumo deadlift squat variation. But what I've really come to appreciate with it is that anytime I've had to pick something up from the floor, I find myself very much in that particular position more than I do, say, a conventional deadlift or a barbell back squat for, like a powerlifting meet, etc. I think the main thing is not to get lost in the weeds there, but any of these things can suit you. You could front squat instead of back squat if you wanted. If that's the way you like to do business, you'll still get stronger. But after a while, I think you can tighten things up a little bit on their specificity and start using variations that are a little more reflective of, positions that you're going to be in and want to reinforce. And that could even be like the lunge. I mean, if you're in the military, how many times do you take a knee? And maybe you've got an 80-pound pack or something like that, and you got to stand up from that without the support of your hands, things like that. So those are just some considerations. Now, getting into conditioning, I think that conditioning is something you should be doing more days of the week than you don't. And a good friend of mine quoted somebody, and I cannot remember who in the heck it was, but he said most people's fast is too slow and their slow is too fast. And so what I recommend for people is that they do 80% of their conditioning at just low intensity, you could call it zone 2, but low intensity aerobic conditioning. That is almost usually so slow for people that it drives them a little batty. I know it has me in the past before I got used to it. But the idea is to build your aerobic base as much as possible. And the reason for that is we have different energy systems that fuel different activities. And so our aerobic is kind of the default state that we are at any point in the day. It is the most energy abundant system in our body to produce energy, because it essentially metabolizes body fat to produce energy for us. So our fat is kind of in a cycle. It's getting turned over. Things are happening there. So the downside to the aerobic system is, if we're going to use maybe a funnel metaphor, is that the spout on this funnel is the least big of the other energy systems. So let's think of that being more of like a garden hose. So like only so much is going to come out of the garden hose. But you're tapped into basically like the city water. There's a tremendous amount of water. If we continue with this metaphor, there's a lot of water on tap for us to be able to use. We just have to be patient and pace ourselves in order to make sure that our output is meeting demand. And so you can influence, we'll just say like the diameter of that hose a little bit. And that's the benefit to doing that training, is that the body becomes more efficient, and we essentially open the gate a little bit more, and we let more of that energy come in. And the reason we want to do that is because it helps us to preserve our higher energy systems for things that we really need them for. So our higher energy systems, I won't get too crazy into the names, but they basically, it would be fair to say like a 10-second all-out effort and down to about a 2-minute all-out effort are where these other two energy systems, and this isn't a hard and fast time rule, but it just, I think, makes it easy for people to understand. Like, one of them is very short, but it is like that fire hose. It's just like all out. So that's an energy system as an example when you're doing a max effort lift and you're recruiting every single fiber in your body to try and, pull a weight from the floor or a person or whatever it is. That's the fire hose energy system. So we can tap into that a little bit differently. And those are the systems I think that belong in the 20% of the time. We still want to develop them. We can develop them. So we try to. And so, we want to spend probably 4 out of 5 days of our conditioning looking more at doing that zone 2 or low intensity aerobic based conditioning. Usually it does not, all these tools, there's going to be outliers, so you're going to have to kind of figure out yourself how you respond to some of these formulas. But taking 180 minus your age is a good place to hit this low intensity aerobic conditioning. We're looking at more like 60 to not above 70% of your heart rate, max heart rate. So for a lot of people, that ends up being in this ballpark of like a lot of 120 beat to 140 beat per minute kind of training. There's tools that you can utilize to measure that kind of stuff, but I don't know how practical or meaningful that is for most people, unless you just love to nerd out on it, or you're at the highest level of eliteness and that kind of stuff starts to matter. So what do we do with the other 20%? The other 20% should be reserved for our more all-out conditioning. And those are going to generally look like sprints of some kind. They can look like sled work, things like that. And the goal here is that I want to see a certain level of output, and I know that I'm training that zone adequately and giving myself enough rest if I can hit it repeatedly during the session. So as an example, perhaps you would want to choose like a 1-minute interval on a rower or a bike, like an Airdyne. I want to see how much progress did I feel like I made when I look at not when I feel, but like when I look at my tool here, my instrument. Say I do a 1-minute sprint and I make it 350 meters on a rower. I want to give myself adequate rest in order to be able to come back and hit 350 meters plus or minus a little bit. And if I am not able to do that, and it's like I hit 350, 320, 310, 300, and I just see it creeping down, you're not giving yourself enough rest and you're not training your zone anymore, that you're, this energy system you're trying to get into. So in reality, like some of our fastest energy systems, we need to proportionately give them more time because they're more intense, even though the total time may not necessarily look quite the same. So like maybe I jump on a bike and I do 10 seconds of all out, or a sled, I do like 10 seconds of an all out push. Well, I may want to give myself on order of like 10 times that amount of time to rest, to recover, to try to do it again. So like on a sled, it's pretty easy. With a lot of these tools, it's easy. Like you're looking to see how far did I make it, and you're trying to really give yourself an all-out effort and not sandbag it. And that's where that, most people's fast is too slow. Like their fast is like this 80%, 85%, and we want their fast to be 95 to 100% of what they can truly put out. My preference for these things is to avoid some of the longer time domains because they're a lot tougher to recover from. They adapt a little less well than your fastest and slowest energy systems. So I tend to prefer when people go for, the short, really intense time domains and give themselves a lot of time to recover. And then if you're not doing that, then you're doing something more along the lines of, your low intensity aerobic conditioning, and you're not trying to crisscross these two things together that much. It will happen sometimes, it's kind of inevitable, but, we're looking to minimize this because, I want to make, as soon as I stop being able to repeat my power output and I begin declining in power output, I am no longer training the thing that I have set out to train. It's very easy when you hit these points in lifting because you'll just fail to lift. That means there's nothing left in the tank, right? It can be, with conditioning, a little bit harder for people to always know that that's happening because they think because my effort level feels 100%, that my output level was 100%, when in reality, their output's been decreasing. And yeah, it does feel like you're trying harder and harder, but to do less and less. So that's usually a sign, I think, hey, I'm not matching my outputs anymore. It's time to pack it in for today. And, look at it. Did I give myself adequate rest? Was that just, where I hit my peak for the day? Because especially with a lot of the military guys that are big into long runs and a lot of body weight work, they'll think that their intensity level was 9 out of 10 because they went and crushed themselves on a 7-mile run. But that's just your fatigue. It's not really your output. There's nothing you could do for 7 miles that is high intensity. It by nature has to be relatively low intensity, but certainly as you tap into your anaerobic systems, to supplement the fact that you can no longer produce enough energy from your aerobic system, then yes. This is also where you'll burn up, when you're running at that 80% for 7 miles, you're burning up a lot of your body glycogen. You're producing a lot of metabolic waste product, things like that. And that stuff's really tough for your body to recover from. And when you're trying to balance this program out, you need to be very conscious of your recovery strategies, because it's certainly not impossible to condition 5 days a week and lift 2 days a week. That's very doable. But when you start to stack up working swing shifts, poor sleep, nutrition's maybe not on point, which is often, in the military, you don't get a lot of control sometimes over what you get to actually eat. These are things that start stacking up where, if you're not really hitting the specific parameters that you are seeking to improve, you're going to find yourself in this realm where your body does now start to break down, things start to ache. We start to see possibly decline. We're entering into overtraining. So that's why I think it's important to be very mindful of when we tap into certain systems that we're trying to keep them where they belong and not get this crossover where we end up now coming into the gym the next day to lift, and now I can't squat for shit because my legs are just smoked from the fact that, my low intensity or zone 2 cardio turned into a lot of zone 3 and 4. And I started using a lot of those anaerobic systems to supplement. And now I don't have that system that would have helped me with lifting now has made me so sore in this other realm that now I'm going to fail today. So it sets up this kind of chain of effects. And so what conditioning, I'll start wrapping this up because it's been going for a long time, try and finish this in under 30. So what specific conditioning modalities you choose is really not that important, unless you have a specific test that you have to pass, in which case I would always encourage you to focus at least some on that specific thing, because you're always going to do a little bit better when you're well practiced at whatever it is you're being tested on. And our physical realm is really no different. You could have a great state of general fitness, but you may not optimize your performance if you're not doing, say, some running, because your job requires you to take a test where you have to run. But that doesn't mean all your conditioning days have to be running. So as an example, since I was being asked about specifically use of kettlebells and things like that in a conditioning sense on top of doing a strength program, I can perform some whole body conditioning through doing rounds of farmer carry, or wader carry, or like front rack or goblet, doing like some of those drag type things, and I can still do low intensity cardiovascular activity with those things as long as I'm monitoring my heart rate and I'm making sure that I'm keeping my heart rate in the zone it needs to be. And so you can make an interval based conditioning day where it's not just putting on your shoes and just going for a run. And the other benefit here is that we're also providing these inputs to our upper body as well. So running is a modality that is very heavily lower extremity dependent, whereas our conditioning circuit, I gave an example of where we have a little higher output, then it comes down, a little higher output comes down. We get our upper body and our core a little more involved, and those things are going to play into your upper body stamina. If you've got to carry somebody, you need strong legs, but your arms got to stay attached to them too, right? So if you're not really hitting those particular things, then you might be making life a little harder for yourself. Other great modalities like the Airdyne or rower, I think, are great because those also, I would call them more holistic conditioning modalities because they involve an integration of your upper body, your lower body, as well as your trunk. And so we provide that, wondrous bath of aerobic goodness to the whole body instead of just certain parts of it. So yeah, there's, a lot of different ways you could do this, but hopefully having this framework for you gives you an idea of how you could start creating something yourself. And what I would say is that I observe a lot of people kind of having some reservation about like some of the things that they don't do as often. They can get a little too into the weeds of like, well, I have to know exactly what I'm doing before I go and do this thing. And the reality is that you do not have to know everything. I don't know everything, even though this is a passion of mine. I've spent years being interested in training, and I went to school for physical therapy. Obviously, I have a doctorate in that. So adaptations in the bodies in response to exercise stress and things like that, are just, I've spent a lot of time there, and I don't feel like I'm an expert in this stuff. And there's very few people that I think truly are experts. So, I listen to those people, and then, what I try to do is take what I learned from some of the best people and then whittle it down so that it's understandable to the general population who doesn't have as strong a background, perhaps, because I recognize my passion for these things is not necessarily everyone's passion, and that their training and conditioning is exercise or strength and conditioning is very much a product of like they simply have to do it. They don't necessarily always want to do it, or they're not super excited about it. It just comes with the territory of being good at your job, and you need to do it. So I try to whittle it down so it's simple. So just to recap, 2 days a week, vertical pushing and pulling, horizontal pushing and pulling for your strength training with a squat and a hinge. 4 days a week, focus on low intensity aerobic conditioning. 1 day a week, you're going to focus on that all out effort. And that's really as complicated as it needs to be. The specific steps you utilize to reach those goals don't matter as much as just picking something and really starting to go with it. So this has probably been my longest one yet. It's my 30-minute master class on explaining exercise training for your tactical athlete. But these things are also good for just anybody, really. They don't have to be just because you're in the military or a firefighter or something like that. So I hope this has been helpful, and I'll see you guys next time. Be safe.